Group 1's presentation on Bel Canto Opera. The purpose of this report was to examine Bel Canto's cost structure, assess the fairness of its current allocation method, and propose an alternative approach to improve financial sustainability. It will also analyze profitability and suggest reforms to enhance financial performance. This analysis aims to outline the ideas on how to increase transparency, support effective decision-making, and explain how to achieve a better financial balance without compromising artistic standards. The key issues that Bel Canto Opera faces include high fixed cost structure, which is a large amount of staff and maintenance. They rely heavily on subsidies. Almost 64% of the budget is from subsidies. Indirect cost allocation problems. The current system allocates €6.36 million of indirect cost using only rehearsal days as its primary cost driver. Quality and cost conflict. Cutting rehearsal days reduces cost, but it risks the compromising performance quality. And dependence on external artists. Hiring world-class conductors and singers is costly but necessary for prestige. Cost structure and allocation. The major cost components include direct and indirect cost. Direct cost, which are the contracted singers, conductors, and stage directors, as well as the wages for the orchestra, choir technicians, and stage staff. Cost for production materials such as costumes, scenery, and lighting and props are also included in the direct costs. Indirect cost. These include the salaries across multiple departments, the finance and HR overheads, as well as costs for marketing, sales, general maintenances, and utilities. To follow on for the cost structure and allocation, the indirect cost allocation method is as follows. Bel Canto allocates €6,359,850 in indirect cost to operas using a single cost driver, the rehearsal days. It is calculated that the opera house has 160 rehearsal days within the season. Therefore, if we divide the indirect cost budget by the number of rehearsal days, we would get the average amount per rehearsal day. So if we divided €6,359,850 by 160 days, that would give us €39,749 per rehearsal day. For example, to allocate to operas, they would use the following method. Using Simon Buckenger's production as an example, they need 20 rehearsal days. Therefore, if you times €39,749 by 20, the average cost would be €794,980.
On Simon Boccanegra's overhead. So Marco is considering cutting rehearsals from Simon Boccanegra from the usual 20 days down to either 10 or just 5. Because overhead is allocated according to total rehearsal days across all operas, reducing his days lowers his share of those costs. At 20 days, his opera absorbs about €795,000 in overhead. If he cuts to 10 days, that figure drops to around €424,000, and with 5 days, it falls further to just over €219,000. What's important to note is that the total production costs for the opera house stay constant at about €4.37 million. The accounting method doesn't actually save money overall, it just shifts who carries the overhead burden. For Marco, that shift frees up funds that he can then direct to hiring more prestigious artists and therefore increasing the show's appeal without breaching the budget. Now looking at the before and after table. So Simon Boccanegra has 10 scheduled performances. If we compare cost per performance under the different scenarios, those being the 20, 10, and 5 rehearsal days, the total works out to be almost the same every time, around $438,000 per performance. What changes though is the internal breakdown. With the full 20 rehearsal days, about $79,000 per performance comes from overhead and about $358,000 from direct costs. At 10 days, the overhead per performance falls to $42,000, while direct cost rises to $395,000. And similarly, at 5 days, overhead drops even further to $22,000 per performance, while direct costs climb to over $415,000. So the table shows that cutting rehearsal days doesn't reduce the cost per performance, but it does change the mix of those costs, shifting more money into Marco's control and away from overhead allocations. Finally, the effect on Tosca's budget. This is where the trade-off emerges. Tosca also requires 20 rehearsal days, and under the baseline allocation of 20 days, Nadia's overhead is the same as Marco's, about €795,000. When Marco cuts back on rehearsal days, the daily overhead rate increases for everyone else. If he drops to 10 days, Tosca's overhead rises to about 848,000. If it goes down to 5 days, it increases again to about 877,000. To stay within her budget, Nadia is then forced to cut back on other areas, such as payments to external artists or production materials. For example, her budget for external artists would shrink to about 1.1 million under the baseline, to just over 1.04 million with 10 days, and then down again to 1.02 million with 5 days. In other words, Marco's gains directly reduce Nadia's flexibility and resources. From a management accounting perspective, this reveals a flaw in the allocation system. Overhead costs like building maintenance are largely fixed, yet by linking them to rehearsal days, the system rewards managers who cut rehearsals and punishes those who preserve them. For Nadia, keeping rehearsal time is critical for quality and reputation, but the system makes it harder for her to justify. Thank you.
Now let's take a look at the bigger picture. This graph shows the profitability of each operas. The blue bars representing the revivals and the red ones representing the new production operas. From this graph, we can conclude that revivals are the financial engine of Bel Canto. La Traviata, for example, has generated more than 1.3 million in profit. That is because of two main reasons. First, revivals use existing sets and costumes, which keeps costs low. And second, they have existing fan base, which results in higher and more guaranteed expected sales. On the other hand, most new productions are consistently loss makers. Operas like Simon Boccanegra and Ottella generated significant losses due to high upfront costs for building new sets, making new costumes, and needing longer rehearsal schedules. But there are a few exceptions though. Alcesta and Giuditta actually turned a profit, even though being a new production, because they did it on a smaller scale, with stricter cost control and performed more performances. This proves that with good budgeting and new productions are possible without any losses. But it does not eliminate all of the financial risks that new productions come with, which brings us to cross-subsidization, meaning the profits from revivals are used to cover the losses of ambitious new production operas. But during the 2024 season, La Traviata was supposed to cover up the losses of Simon Boccanegra and Ottella, but they ended up having with a negative margin. For crop subsidization to work, it needs to be sustainable, which brings me up to my recommendations. To make this model more sustainable while keeping the artistic quality the same, first recommendation is to replace the current single cost driver with activity-based costing system. Currently, all costs are allocated based on rehearsal days, which is not only unfair, but also creates a sense of confusion. Instead, Bel Canto should allocate costs according to what really drives them. There are some indirect costs which are not related to rehearsal days but still goes into it. For example, marketing and building utility costs. Instead, marketing costs should allocate it to campaign activities or a number of performances. And as for building and utility costs, should be based on theater usage days. Through this way, managers can see the true costs of their artistic decisions, which can lower the incentive to cut rehearsal time to lower the costs. My second recommendation will be strategically manage the cross-subsidization model so it'll be sustainable. Instead of letting subsidies happen by chance, Bel Canto should classify productions into three categories. The first category should be the revivals expected to make profits, and the break-even operas which can cover up their own losses with their profits, and the last should be the new production operas expected to make losses. Revivals opera should be strategically paired with new production operas. For example, using two revival operas to fund one new production opera. In conclusion, Bel Canto Opera has been facing against large financial strain due to high fixed costs of opera, combined with inefficient system for allocating indirect costs. The current system, which uses rehearsal time as the single cost driver, does not reveal the full picture. It encourages managers to cut rehearsal time to lower allocated overhead, which can harm artistic quality of the performance. Opera's cross-subsidization method is not sustainable as it shows great financial risk under current costing model. Activity-based costing model should be applied to separate some indirect costs which are not related to rehearsal time, resulting in more transparent cost data and better decision making. Moreover, creating a sustainable system which does not sabotage opera's quality. Thank you.